Well, hello. How are you doing today? I'm doing well, and I hope you are too. Today, we're going to paint up the Tau Pathfinders. They're really similar to the Tau Fire Warriors that I painted a few weeks back, but they've got some interesting differences. These painted up pretty nicely and pretty quickly. That's the important part. Join me, will you? Let's check it out. Pathfinder team. I learned some lessons from my previous attempts at making Tau models, and the first lesson I've picked up is that I'm gluing these guys to the base from the get-go. The contact points on the feet of these models are so tiny that it is really hard to get the models onto their bases. I've had to resort to using epoxy putty, and then there's like a little round glob that I have to pretend is a rock. It's gross. So what I've done is, before I did any priming, I glued these on with the plastic cement. I'm hoping for the strongest possible bond. They're not finished curing, but they're dry enough that I can handle them right now. I went ahead and primed these guys with, this stuff, Rust-Oleum. It's the flat protective enamel. It's supposed to be flat, and it looks pretty flat to me. It went on pretty nicely. I hadn't used this before, but primer is getting hard to get right now. So the logistics supply chain thing is wreaking havoc all over the place. So I'm making do where I can. The second thing I'm going to do here, the second thing I've learned, is that I'm not really all that happy with my paint scheme, although I suspect it has more to do with the model interacting with the paint scheme than the paint scheme by itself. So I think that the paint scheme on troops is going to look pretty good, and it's going to look pretty good on some of the mech models. But on some of the mech models, it's not going to look very good, and it all kind of depends on where things are placed and how close together they are. I don't know. I think that's the deal. So I'm going to give it another shot here with a little bit of a tweak. And the tweak here is that, the tweak is that these Pathfinders look an awful lot like the Fire Warriors. The only difference really is going to be on the weapons. And so I thought I might have trouble distinguishing between these two, specifically since I don't play these games. At least I haven't yet. I don't want to say that like, I'm never going to play this game. It's just, it's not something I've done. So in order to distinguish these from each other, I'm going to flip the paint scheme around. So where before I'd have the tunic, like the cloth parts of the outfit, I'd have the secondary, the dark gray. I'm going to flip that around, and the pants are going to be the light gray. The hard shell is going to be the dark gray. And I've mixed up a little bit of glaze with ash gray. It should look very, very similar to the gray that's here, but it's going to be just different enough. And so I'm going to put down this base coat of glaze over all the soft armor bits. And I think I'm not having the same problem I had before. So the last project I finished was the XV8 Crisis battlesuits, and for some reason the primer it wasn't working, man. It was fighting me the entire time. It was a little hydrophobic or hydroscopic. I don't know which other thing it was, but it was fighting me. In other words, it wasn't letting me put the paint on the model. So I mixed up the glaze. I used a new product I haven't used before. It's not a new product, but it's a product that's new to me, airbrush flow improver. So to my paint, I added just a little bit of water, I added a little bit of this, and I added a little bit of the quick wash glazing medium, kind of in the hope to thin down the paint without impacting its ability to stick to itself and to stick to the model. And so far it's working pretty good. It's similar to I've seen some videos that, you know, there are recipes on how to create your own contrast paints, which I'm interested in using now. And so I picked up on that recipe. This isn't exactly that recipe. I just wanted to have my normal paints a little thinner, a little easier to work with. And so far, anyway, it seems to be working. So if you're having trouble with your paints, it may not be a bad idea to explore some different recipes. It's working out for me, at least so far. So here are these Pathfinders with their base coats all on there. And turns out these are a little more different than I thought from the Fire Warriors. The tunics, the leg stuff, it's all tunic. That doesn't have any, they don't have any armor plates on those. So yeah, it's going to be a little different, and I kind of like that. And so you'll see I did the kind of the primary, the darker gray on the carapace, the chest armor, and also the boots. And then the secondary armor, I just went, or the secondary color, the lighter gray, just that's what the tunic is, those pants. They look kind of cool, like little MC Hammer pants. Oh, oh, oh. And I realize that a lot of people watching have no idea who MC Hammer is. That's okay. I have the old. Anyway, for some reason, it was much easier to paint, to lay down this base glaze than it had been in a while. Certainly much easier than my last project, which was those XV8 Crisis paddle suits. You know, I've been experimenting with the paint mixing. This time around, I used a little bit of airbrush flow improver and some water and some quick shade wash medium, and it seems to have done something. It flows easier, it's thinner, it doesn't break up. I don't know if I can replicate that, but I'm going to try experimenting a bit more with mixing the paints because I like how that kind of worked out. So this next step, as I rearrange my models here, the next step is to apply the wash. That's going to bring out some of the cool details that the models have without making me spend a ton of time doing that. The trick here is to work clean, not to let the wash puddle anywhere that you don't want it. And the same wash is going to go kind of all over the model because both the dark gray and the light gray get the wash. So I'm just going to slap it on there. But again, going to be very careful to make sure that it pools exactly the way I want it to. Not, you know, not kind of what do you call it? Not slapdash as it could otherwise be, but make sure that it dries where you want it. The idea is that you want this pooling kind of towards the bottom and inside little cracks so that it enhances what's there without changing the color too much. And certainly you want to avoid unsightly puddles, like large globs of the stuff. Yeah, makes kind of a big change with very little effort. I'm going to let these dry, and I'll show you what they look like once it's dried up. But it's promising so far, kind of like what I'm seeing. So these guys are coming together pretty quickly, actually. I've got the basing done and I've got the washing done, and they look pretty decent. So yeah, I mean, it's much faster than I typically get these done. The paints haven't given me any trouble. I don't know if it's the mix that I'm using, but holy cow, I'm making some progress here pretty quickly. So the next step, since those two things are done, is to start adding some of the details. I'm really close to assembling the model, gluing the arms and possibly the head. But before I do that, I want to make sure I get this detail done. So that little center dot there, I usually paint that blue, so I'm going to get that done. And these models have a single knee pad. That's also going to be the blue accent color. So I'm going to undercoat both of those things with some off-white. I'm using skeleton bone, but it's a kind of thinned down mixture with the flow improver, the quick shade medium, and a little bit of water, because I want to make sure it flows into all the little crevices like around that dot. It's a really nice detail to get done. And then I'll hit either this dot here, probably this dot here, and then this power meter is what I'm thinking it is. I'm going to undercoat that as well for its eventual kind of LED emissive color. So just going to do those. Alright, so all the little blue spots on the model, they're in there. I went ahead and added the blue, and over anything that's got blue, there's a little dot there in the back. There's some little dots on the boots. I went ahead and added some of the blue tone to kind of just make it shiny and give it a transparency kind of effect. Just kind of emphasize it a little bit more than it would be just being a flat color. I did the same thing to all the arms. As you see here, each arm has one blue shoulder pad and one dark gray shoulder pad. And I've even added started kind of the little bit of detail on the guns, although it's just these are, I forget what they're called, like the sniper variant. I added, there's some teeth that looks like the magnets on a railgun or something. I undercoated them in white. I'm going to add some other kind of color to give a glow effect. I haven't decided on what that's going to look like yet, but I knew whatever I picked is going to be a bright color and it's going to need an undercoat, so I went ahead and did that before this next step, which is to add the arms to the models. You'll also notice that I've added just a very simple base. There's no elevation to these guys. I didn't want to mess with it because these troops have very little point of contact between the feet and the base, and so I would have to do some crazy stuff. So I just added a little bit of Grelin Earth. I slathered that on the base. I say slathered, it was actually very carefully because you have to kind of go around the feet. And I sprinkled just some rock-looking things. It hasn't dried all the way out yet, as you can see. The crackling isn't kind of finished yet. There's some crackling, but it's not all done. So I'll let that dry out. But it's dry enough for me to start going ahead and adding the arms. Now I do want to find, here we go. Here's my sergeant. The sergeant has a special arm, I think. I'm going to put them to the side. And I'll start with these. I'll just start gluing them together. Once they're done, I will move on to starting to paint the heads, which I haven't even primed yet, but it's about that time. I'll show you when I get there. Alright, super glue has dried, and it's looking pretty decent, actually. Nothing to complain about for a change. Okay, except maybe for the base, it looks really plain, kind of gross. I hope to punch it up a little bit. Maybe some tufts of grass will help it look better, maybe some wash, but that's what I've got right now. The next piece that I need to work on are the helmets, and they're right there. I just give them a good prime. And so the first thing I'm going to do is, since the upper shell of the helmet is going to have my accent color, that blue. I'm going to lay down some undercoat of this skeleton bone mixture, glaze thing. Once that dries up, I'll add the darker gray value that goes underneath the helmet. So the helmets are basically two colors. There's a top color and there's a bottom color. But since the top color is the lighter color, I'm laying down that one first. I should minimize my need to do any additional coverage. Alright, these helmets now have their undercoat. I'm going to go in there and more carefully add the accent color. And this I'm just going to add to those places where I want it to be blue, which admittedly is a large portion of the helmet, but yeah, this is probably going to take a couple of coats, just like the undercoat took. It took me 2 coats to make it look decent, otherwise it was kind of streaky, but that's okay. For the heads that don't have a helmet, the sergeant for example, I'm going to go with a base of purple. I'm going to go with like a lighter purple, a purple that I didn't like for armor before. I'm hoping it'll work a little nicer on the face, since I kind of want to just glaze the kind of the bone color that's on here already. And once it dries, I'll go over it with a little highlighting, a little washing, that sort of thing, to make the head look a little nicer. But I do want to give it like an alien color, while also staying away from the blue that's so traditionally associated with Tau. I want mine to be a little different. But I'm gonna go over it with some blue to give it some of that blue tone. I just want it to be, you know, a little more different than usual. I'm pretty happy with the way these unhelmeted heads for the Tau came out. I gave them a bone white undercoat. Then I went over them with some purple glaze. I did that a couple of times to make sure I had decent coverage. Then I went in with a little, what was this? I think it was, oh yeah, it was tanned flesh. It was this color, and I just gave it some very light highlights on those kind of the raised areas of the head, and it gave it a nice bit of contrast. It's a step that I don't usually do because my results have been pretty mixed, but I think I'm getting a little better at doing that. And to incorporate the tanned flesh color and kind of blend it in with the purple that was behind it, I went ahead and added a second coat of the blue tone wash. Actually, no, it wasn't the blue tone wash. It was flesh wash. It was this stuff. So let me try that again. It was the bone white base color over the primer. Then I went in with some purple glaze, a couple of coats of that. Then I did the flesh wash over that. Then I did the highlighting with the tanned flesh, and then I went back over it again with the flesh tone, just to incorporate the highlights, the kind of the middle tone, and the darker purples in there. And I really like the way these turned out. I'm pretty happy with them. Now, I have two here. I want to say, so I have 9 of the helmeted heads, and I have 2 of these, which makes 11. One of these is extra, and I want to tell you that I did this because I wanted to experiment with them and see which one I liked better. But that's not the case. The real reason for me having 2 of these is because I miscounted. So I have 2 of these, but that means I can now pick the one that I want the most. Now I'm probably going to go with this guy because it's got the little, I don't know, the top knot, and I kind of like the way it looks. It's not quite done. I'm going to do a little wash over the top knot, maybe a little detail here to kind of show that it's kind of braided, and that should work. I went in on the back of this head, so it's like the suit element of the helmetless head. I went ahead and did a black undercoat because I was having some problems with the gray. So underneath the blue of the helmet, I want to have the gray, and it's not really showing up. I still see a lot of the bone white. For some reason, the gray that I'm using, it's the ash gray glaze, it just isn't showing up very well. No matter how much I unthin the glaze, it's not giving me very good coverage. So I think what I'm going to need to do is going to go back to these helmets and undercoat them in black and then reapply the gray over that. I think that's going to give me better results. And so I did that here, but I kind of wanted to show you that sometimes, sometimes your best laid plans don't work out very well. So I'm going to go ahead and start redoing this with the undercoat and see what it looks like. There's quite a lot of problems you can solve when you're painting with just redoing work you've already done. When something doesn't work out the way you wanted it, sometimes the best thing to do is just to redo it in a different way, and you might end up getting better results. In this case, I had a really good hunch that resetting this color on the helmet was going to work, but I didn't really know. And obviously, it's not dry, but this looks gray to me, where before it looked like it was like a weird cloudy bone white color that I didn't want. So when you're doing this, and I don't think this is just if you're speed painting, like if you're painting with glazes and washes primarily. I suspect that this holds true for if you're doing kind of regular painting. If you try something and you just don't like the way it looks, you don't have to keep it. You can if you want. If you're like, it's not what I wanted, but I can live with it. That's totally fine, but don't be afraid to just redo something that just didn't work for you. You might find that that you like the results a lot better when you try again, and ultimately, if you paint over a surface on these models many, many times, typically you're not going to see a lot of degradation of results. I think it would take a lot of coats, or just like really bad gummy ones. Like if you don't thin your paints and you kind of glob them on, then yeah, you're going to see some loss of detail. But for the most part, you can get away with quite a few layers of paint on your models without losing much, if any, of the detail. So, don't be afraid to restart. Push comes to shove, the worst thing in the world happens. You can always strip the models and start again from scratch, but most of the time, it's not necessary. Here's my Pathfinder Sergeant, and he looks pretty decent, I have to say. He doesn't have any details on him, but I was able to glue his arms and his head on there, and he's looking pretty cool. So now that I have that proof of concept, I can move forward to the next step, which is to add a little bit of easy detail to these heads. And so these helmets are now prepared. They have the light gray glaze as the base color. I'm going to go in and bring out the detail with a bit of this dark tone. It's a custom mix that I've been using for the bodies. I'm just going to apply that same color, same wash here to the underside of the helmets, making sure I control the pooling to end up where I want it to give me a nice even color. And do the same in the neck area and to this face plate. It looks kind of like that. Once it dries up, it should look a lot like the bodies they will eventually go onto. So I'll do that to the sergeant and then to the rest of these heads. There we go. So now it looks like that part of the head is blended in with the rest of his uniform. It looks like it belongs where it will eventually rest. That's the idea. Let's implement. Man, these are coming along pretty nicely. Here are my Pathfinders. They're looking pretty sweet. They don't have much of any detail on them yet, and that's by design. I just got done getting them to this level, and so now it's going to get closer to that time where we do details, but there is one major step that I need to finish before I move into the detailing, and that is to get the helmets to match the look of the other blue pieces. And so to do that, I'm going to get a little bit of my blue tone and just apply it to all the blue parts of the helmet, kind of like so, and that'll give it the nice depth that I like to have on these parts. These Pathfinders are almost done. I'm kind of surprised at how quickly they've gone. So, you know, it's good news and bad news. The good news is that this project is almost wrapped up, but the bad news is that I feel like I haven't spent that much time with them. Kind of a little sad, but I've accomplished most of what I wanted to do. I'm a little concerned with this secondary gray. In some places it's pretty clear, right? It's a darker shade of gray. In other places it's kind of not, and I'm thinking I might need a second pass at those areas. Probably just the shoulder pad, maybe that wrist area. Although it's pretty decent right now. If I go in there and touch it up, I risk messing it up, right? So there's that to consider. But I think, let me try it on one model and see if it's going to be worth the time and effort. And I think I'll refresh my paint palette with a little bit more of this stuff, the Necromancer Cloak. Make sure it's a little darker this time. I probably thinned it out too much last time. Alright, so here's what it looks like with a little bit of a touch-up. And yeah, I think I'm going to have to spend some time retouching that paint. I mean, it's a subtle difference, but I think it's important. Especially since there's not a ton of detail on this model. So what detail is there, you really need to make sure it shows up, right? So let me do that to the rest of these guys. The next detail I'm going to add is a little blue right there on the weapon's kind of visor, their what do you call this? Their targeting thing. It's just to kind of show it's computerized and it's lighting up for, you know, reasons. It's just to give it a dash of extra color, something to catch the eyes. So it'll look something like that. And I do the same thing on the back side where the Tau's eyes would go. I'll do that to any weapons that have that sort of detail. Alright, so the touch-up work is done. I also went in and undercoated a lot of these little light-up details, like the LEDs and the face masks. Some of them have them on the greaves, I think they're called, the wrist armor. And I had already done this back detail. It's like a little power meter. And so all of these are going to get some color. The power meter, I'm going to go with green to indicate all is good. Same thing for the details here on the greaves. And some of these weapons have similar buttons on the weapon itself. So these sniper-looking rifles, they've got two little green dots on them now. Let's go ahead and get some red onto the face masks of these Tau. Just a little dot there to pick out the optical sensors. For these sniper dudes, their weapon's a little different from the rest of them, so I wanted to kind of pick that out. I've undercoated the inside of those rifles. They kind of look like a rail rifle situation. I've undercoated them in white, and I'm going to pick out that detail with a little bit of yellow. Hoping it works. Yeah, it's a really finicky detail, but if you manage to pull it off, it works pretty well if you're undercoated. And so when you're rubbing the yellow on there, you really just need to overbrush it. It's not quite a dry brush, it's just an overbrush. This next little bit of painting is just going to be applying a wash on these lit up details. So these rail guns are going to have, I don't have any yellow wash, and I'm not sure that that would look very good in this context, so I'm going to use a red wash. It'll be kind of an orangey glow that this detail produces. I will do the same to the lenses on the eyes and any other red details on each of these models. I was almost done with this project, and then I realized I hadn't done these little antennae that go on the Tau helmets. So I thought about, you know what, they don't need them. But they do. I want to do a good job. I'm liking the way these look. And so I took the extra time. I cut these out, sanded them down, primed them, gave them a coat of dark gray. Actually, gave them 2 coats of dark gray. And then give them a wash of the dark tone. And then I undercoated. There's a little dot on the antenna. I could have just let it pass. I could have just let it slide and blend into the rest of the piece, but I thought, no. I've come this far. I'm going to do the best job I can possibly do, darn it. So, spent the extra time. I'm dotting my I's, as it were. But this is the last step. And just like that, we're done. These Pathfinders are complete, and I'm pretty happy with the way they turned out. This was a relatively simple paint project and build, honestly. I didn't have any problems building it. There wasn't a ton of flashing and mold lines to get rid of. There were some, fairly standard, but yeah, it was a relatively straightforward build, and the painting was actually a lot of fun. I did some interesting things with my paint mixing, and I'm still experimenting with it. During my Crisis Suit video, I had kind of a painting meltdown, and it kind of, I don't know, man, I struggled in that video. I did not have that issue with this project. You know, when I initially started this, I thought they were going to be very, very similar to my Fire Warriors, but that's just really, it really just is a reflection on how little I know about the Tau, other than they're cool models and there's mechs and they shoot and stuff. But yeah, the painting scheme is actually very, very different. There's a lot of that kind of the cloth, the tunic, the secondary armor color, and it's that light gray base coat. There's a lot of that on this model. The darker gray, the primary color, it's really confined to the chest area and the shoulder pads. I know, and in fact for me, it's just one shoulder pad, but that really depends on how you paint them. I decided to go with one blue shoulder pad to kind of allude to my Fire War team that have that one large blue shoulder pad. But other than that, it was fairly straightforward. I employed a lot of glazing and a lot of washing here, and that wash really brought out the details on this model. There are a few more details on the chest piece, but unfortunately, the gun covers the chest piece on almost every single one of these models. Perhaps the model that is perhaps the least obscured, that chest piece, is the sergeant. He's kneeling down and he's kind of reloading his weapon, but it's still fairly obscured. So I mean, for most of these models, you can't even see that little blue dot I put in the middle, which is kind of a shame because it takes a little time to get that done. But I'm pretty happy with these results. In fact, you'll notice that my Tau Sergeant here, he's the only one without a helmet. I actually did some blending. The head is mostly purple. I got some pink there to highlight, and then I blended it in with some wash, and I think it looks really cool. I gave him black pupilless eyes just to kind of, well, you wouldn't really see the pupil, you wouldn't see the iris if Tau even have such anatomical features. But I from a distance, you can't really see that stuff, so I just painted in black. And I could have gone with a gloss coat over the black, and I didn't think about it, but maybe that's something I should be doing to kind of, sell the idea that their eyes are completely black, kind of like Beta Zeds, I think, from Star Trek. They have like no pupils. Their eyes are all black or something like that. I think I've seen that in Star Trek. Maybe I'm wrong. Please don't hate me if I got it wrong. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with these results. These sniper variants are interesting too. They had a bit more stuff going on with the weapon. There's a lot more kind of light up effects on it. There's a couple of buttons. There's that little kind of display there that I kind of imagined it as an ammo counter or a power feed, and so this one's red because he's reloading. Hey, there's no charge. That contrasts with these guys who are, laying down some fire. Their ammo gauge, their power gauge is green to denote, hey, you've got a charge, you can shoot to your heart's content. And I'm not really happy with that yellow and red thing. I have a good sense for what I was going for. I just don't know that I executed quite good enough. But it's still superior to just a black rail in there. I think it gives it a little more interesting kind of visual interest for the model. One of the things that I forgot to the end, aside from those little antenna pieces, which, by the way, may or may not be oriented the right way. That actually might belong on the other side of the helmet, but whatever, it's fine. He's his own Tau. He's different for the greater good. These little ammo pouches you see, they add quite a bit of visual interest, but not as much as the Imperial Guard. I think they're more substantial for the Imperial Guard, and so they draw the eye a little bit more when you look at the back. For these Tau models, they're a little more muted, but you do have a nice variety of little accoutrements back there. Like some of them have a grenade pack, and I have a light up core in the middle to say, hey, this one's safe, green is safe. Had I had any models that were throwing the grenade, I would have made that red to note, hey, throw this away. Some of them have pouches like this, which I did in my normal, just leather brown with a brown type wash. Some of the others have, extra magazines for their rifles, which I think is a nice little touch. They're a little oversized, but that's Warhammer 40k for you. And I even, distinguished, this time I didn't do that for my other troopers, my other Tau troopers, but I distinguished the leather strap that's holding them to the belt. Although I didn't mark out the belt, it was another one of those details that I forgot. I could have done that, but I probably would have gone with the black. I don't think I would have gone with a leather belt, and so that would have looked even more funny in this setup, but whatever. It's the future, it's space, these are aliens, it's magic. It's a magical leather strap that sticks to the uniform. That's fine. I even really like the way the bases turned out. When I first started creating the bases, I wasn't sure if I was going to like them. Because I used the crackle medium. It's from Games Workshop, but typically when I use that, it just means it's a low effort base. And they kind of started off that way, but when I added the grass tufts to it, it really stood out. And so most of these, I picked kind of big tufts of grass for these bases, and I think they look pretty neat. I'm just happy all around with the result of this model. For the sergeant, he had a knife attached to the backpack, but it fell off because I touched it. They can be a little finicky. At any rate, this was a fun project. This was a great painting experience. It was a great building experience. I recommend them. If I ever run across another kit, I'll probably paint some more. And I can't say that about a bunch of Warhammer 40k models where I'd be like, I have to paint another one of these. These were a pleasure to paint, especially with my speed painting, my lazy man's technique, where it's just glazing and washing and a few little details. That makes the project much more manageable. You can do it after work, after school, whatever your situation is, and it won't take up all of your time. And you'll still get nice results. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Your Average Bear Gaming. I hope you learned something. I hope you liked the video. If you did, consider giving me a like, maybe a subscribe if you want to see more content just like this one. Whichever way you go, have a nice afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.